But for the things that we do in STEM, perfectionism in particular is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing at all. Besides, I pretty much like the next bridge I drive over not to fall down while I'm driving on it. And you need perfectionism for that. You need perfectionism and precision for that in your numerics and calculations. You absolutely need it. Alrighty, I'm back, folks. I'm sorry for being away for a little while. Been quite busy on a few things. If you missed the stream with the reason we learned last week, I suggest you go take a look at it because it's about some of the underpinnings theoretical of SEL that you probably didn't know, including the disturbing desire to manipulate the malleable portions of a person's personality. Go check that one out. You'll go find it. I'll put it in the description here for you if I remember to. I'm sorry if I don't, but if not, it's over on the reason we learned, but you should see that. If you saw me commenting on this particular tweet, this comes from the Sharing Science Twitter, which is part of the American Geophysical Union, which put out this particular article. And it was, shall we say, stoked some ire because it brings into science, again, a whole lot of stuff that has nothing to do with science. In a lot of ways. And it's it's really amazing. So I've seen a lot of these graphics here, and Unwokable has been tweeting about this lately too, that these particular graphics are common to a lot of these kinds of things where there's a lot of postmodernist influence and ways of approaching things. But the article, this is actually the second time AGU's Sharing Science account tweeted this article out, at least that I could see. I think it might have been 3 times and I just missed the first one, but this is the second or third time. But the article itself is a mess. I'm amazed it was published, to be honest, because of the logical fallacies here. Now, one thing I'm going to say straight out of the gate with this. This is about the ideas in the article, nothing about the authors. That's it. That's all I want to see here from anybody, is going after the ideas, not the authors. This is the article in question. Whoops, I was scrolled down off here. In the journal Frontiers in Communication, Acknowledging and Supplanting White Supremacy Culture in Science Communication and STEM, the Role of Science Communication Trainers. Racism remains the root cause of underrepresentation of Black, Indigenous, and Latinx scholars across STEM. It also contributes to a lack of diversity in science communication, the types of science stories that are told, and the communities science communicators seek to engage. Racism is omnipresent in STEM, from education to research to science communication, because STEM institutions operate within a culture of systemically privileging whiteness, i.e. white supremacy culture, that dictates the norms and practices that most in these fields heedlessly accept and replicate. In this perspective, we acknowledge the ways in which SciComm and SciComm training perpetuate white supremacy culture and examine how SciComm trainers can use their power to dismantle it. SciComm trainers pioneer new methods of sharing ideas and influence the culture of STEM, so are uniquely situated to bring about systemic change to address these problems in SciComm, STEM, and society, starting with 4 core themes for action: authentic interrogation, acknowledgement and accountability, representation, culturally responsive practice, and inclusion. We also describe our current work, which builds upon the key traits of inclusive SciComm identified by leaders in the field to co-create the framework to guide authentic, culturally competent, and inclusive SciComm. The draft framework interrogates the key traits across spheres of influence: self, interpersonal, community, institution, society, politics, and culture, with the ultimate goal of using SciComm to supplant WSC across these spheres of influence, and with new co-created norms centering minoritized scholars, science communicators, and audiences in STEM. For one thing, I noticed something. Pretty much copied first sentence in the y'all can't quite see it, but first sentence in the abstract is copied right into the introduction. There was no uniqueness there in making the abstract. Certainly interesting there. Oh, goodness. There's a lot of postmodernist stuff in this. The thing about power, the thing about dismantling stuff, the thing about the notion that this is omnipresent in everything and you can't get away from it, and this kind of stuff here. I will point out that they keep using Latinx, and they really should stop because it's not popular at all. Here, I mean, you might view that as the name you want to use, and fine, go at it. But at least in polling that I can find, it's not a popular phrase to call people Latinx. Anyway, or Latinx, or however the heck you pronounce it. But there's an awful lot of stuff here, and I don't want to go through all of this. There's just not enough time to do that today. But I do want to hit a couple of important things to point out here, because the fact that AGU promoted this and that Frontiers in Science Communication published it just shows how unseriously they think about it, because there's not a drop of science actually in this article, be it social science or physical sciences. There's not a drop in here. I don't think. Anyway. Racism is the root cause of underrepresentation of Black, Indigenous, Latinx across STEM. Like I said, carbon copy from the abstract, that one. You notice you give no citation for that? Give no citation for that. And I will remind you all that simply having a disparity is not proof of systemic racism. It is not in the slightest. And we're going to get to that in a second, because I noticed something interesting later on that is deserving of a very stern critique on the part of the authors, on the part of the reviewers, that this was flawed premise put into this paper. Anyway, but this is straight out of the gate something I want to point out, because this happens a lot with postmodernist related stuff, and with critical theory and critical race theory in particular. This happens all the time. This kind of notion here, racism is omnipresent in STEM, because STEM institutions operate within a system that advantages white people, termed by Jones and Okun in a 2001 article, White Supremacy Culture. Jones and Okun identified 15 characteristics, including perfectionism, paternalism, power hoarding, worship of the written word, sense of urgency, belief in one right way, and defensiveness. That's a white fragility fallacy there, by the way. The white fragility fallacy being, being the notion that if you stand up and say no and you disagree with this nonsense and you defend yourself, that you're perpetuating, you're showing your racism, if you will. That is the white fragility fallacy of Robin DiAngelo. White supremacy culture is embedded in the design of our institutions. It dictates the norms and practices, which, by the way, the white fragility fallacy is effectively a Kafka trap, is what it is. It's a logical fallacy that's really, really bad. It dictates the norms and practices that most in these fields heedlessly accept and replicate. Due to its pervasive nature, white supremacy culture is difficult for many to see and process, thereby making it equally as difficult to address. Now, I want to make a point here. And I hope this shows up. Yeah, it does. Okay, good. Mostly shows up on the screen here. Defensiveness. Either or thinking. Fear of open conflict. Individualism. I'm the only one. Objectivity. Objectivity. Valuing the truth. Valuing the truth. And you notice how they define objectivity here is actually nothing near the same of what the rest of us actually define objectivity. Impatience with any thinking that does not appear logical. Apparently, I'm showing objectivity, and for them it would be white supremacy culture, because I am critiquing the logic of their article. Hey. The belief that emotions are inherently destructive, irrational, and should not play a role in decision-making or group process. I don't know that any scientist thinks that they should not absolutely not play a role, but that's a whole thing. Only one right way. Belief there's only one right way. Paternalism. Perfectionism. Perfectionism, one of the things about framing it this way as being white supremacy culture is you inherently frame it as bad. You inherently frame perfectionism as being a bad thing. And I mean perfectionism as in getting it right. And you know why there's a reason we strive so hard to get it right when you're talking about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? There's a reason for that. Because without getting it right, getting things right in this, bridges fall down. bridges fall down, planes can't fly, all of these other kinds of things that depend on getting it right. And that actually has a heck of an impact on a person's life, or many people's lives, if you will, if you can't get it right. So this is fascinating to me. Right to comfort. What the hell are you talking about? Sense of urgency. Quantity over quality. Progress is bigger. More. Okay, quantity over quality is not just a problem with STEM A, but the other problem with this is that that's just a generic problem. The fact that we've been obsessed to the idea of getting things published in journals as quickly as possible for so long that we focus on the quantity of publications that a scientist produces as a career advancement, as a measure of professional development. It's not necessarily anything to do with white supremacy culture. You would have to do that, or shall we say, whiteness or what have you, entirely. Because I want to make a point here. The thing that bothers me with this is these are all characteristics and some very screwy definitions for them. I will link you the article so you can go look and read. But some very screwy definitions for them. And here's the thing. And, okay, hold on. Either or thinking. So, hold it. Here's the thing about either or thinking. What they're actually referring to when they say the description here results in trying to simplify complex things. One of the things we look for when we're doing scientific practice is to some kind of knowledge that we can generalize the results, particularly in physical sciences. You're looking for a pattern that holds up over time that you can generalize back to a physical process and therefore be able to predict off of it if that's your goal, to predict things, or even just to understand why. That's not either or thinking. That's trying to generalize something. Either or thinking is something that actually appears in this article later on, something that they did themselves. Here, so I will show you that shortly. But one of the points I wanted to make with this is, hold on a second. If you're claiming these are characteristics of white supremacy culture, what about the myriad scientists around the world who aren't white and actually also have some of these characteristics, A, and B, framing it this way? You're framing all of them as being bad. You're framing all of them as being bad. And yeah, there's things to improve in science, and there's things to improve in science as a profession. There's nothing, I don't disagree with that statement. In fact, matter, I think I just mentioned one with the idea of peer review and the fact that we were pushing quantity over quality because a professional development metric is, getting publications, and the amount of publications you get published in a year is a professional development metric for most scientists, particularly if you're in university and you're trying to get tenure. Here. Power hoarding. But yeah. The thing about this is that it reminds me, this whole thing reminds me very much of something else that got the Smithsonian in trouble. I don't know if you all recall this some years ago. The National Museum of African American History and Culture had a graphic that they had up on their website that had whiteness in here and what have you. The aspects and assumptions of whiteness in the United States poster was ultimately removed. And it was removed after tremendous outcry from all people alike here. The whole chart was an absolute disaster. Though they left a lot of it on their website, but the whole chart was an absolute disaster, and allow me to show you why. One of the things they show in this chart that makes it an absolute disaster is they assign all of these kind of particular things, values, characteristics, and what have you, as being aspects and assumptions of whiteness or white culture. What the hell do you say then to a scientist who is a person of color and holds dear to all of these different things? The reason this graphic drove people crazy is because it was assigning characteristics to people based on skin tone or based on race. And there's a word for that. Likewise, what I'm going to tell you right now is that this chart, by calling it and branding all of these characteristics as being part of white supremacy culture, in a way does define that all of these things are connected with white people the white race. It is no different than that graphic that the National Museum of African American History and Culture had to pull down because people were really angry. I showed that graphic to a number of colleagues I do know who are also people of color from different parts of the world, and they were horrified by it. They were horrified and angry because of the fact that they value a lot of those things on that chart. And that graphic basically told them that they don't. At the same time, here, this is all getting framed as bad. This is all getting framed as something that white people do, like individualism, objectivity. These are things important to science. They're all framed as ills here. They're all framed as bad, and very much in postmodern framework. Again, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I encourage you to go read it. Postmodern framework in here, quantity over quality, whatever. In here, power hoarding. People think perfectionism is a bad thing. Perfectionism can be a bad thing if taken to the extreme and you're demanding like everything in your house be laid out perfectly. That might be a little of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. But perfectionism in science, getting the code right, getting the analysis right, making your analysis is as perfect as you can make it, that is not necessarily a bad thing, and yet it's framed in here as a bad thing, but it's also framed because it's a characteristic of white supremacy culture as being tied to white people. What about all the scientists who are people of color? Are you serious? That's why this article is worthy of this critique, because it makes these incredible leaps to assigning character traits to people on the basis of race. Or de-assigning it. All right, let us continue. That's one of the reasons why this article's a mess, hot mess. The other reason I want you to say here is they automatically presume it's there. They provide no proof, no defense of any of it here. So the automatic presumption that white supremacy culture exists in STEM to begin with, you notice that with some of these questions, they do not here actually show you that any of it exists in STEM. Main year of this article. Okay. Oh yeah, this graphic. Concept for creating oh, well, that's later. Okay. This is the other one I really wanted to hit, just to make the point. Some argue science is neutral, objective, and even colorblind. These suggestions fail to explain persistent disparities in STEM. Biases are frequently invisible to dominant groups who do not experience them personally. Dominant groups hold most leadership roles in STEM. Accordingly, the biases in STEM are frequently invisible to those in power, leadership, decision-making roles. Racial disparities in STEM are most visible evidence and most urgent reminder of racism and white supremacy culture in STEM institutions. Cultural norms, values, beliefs, and standards give institutional power to white scientists and enable them to maintain power and advantages over minority groups. All right. There's a heck of a lot in here, and there's a reason it is what I want to focus on next, because, as I said, they just said in the other graphic, either or thinking is a characteristic of white supremacy culture. In this table I'm about to show you, they did either or thinking themselves. They committed the logical fallacy of either or thinking. Let me show you. And reducing things to simplicity, for that matter. So, if this statement is true, STEM institutions are colorblind, then we expect demographics of STEM institutions would reflect the demographics of the general population. Funding and pay would not correlate with race. Do you understand why this is a problem? Do you understand why this is a problem? This is either or thinking right here. If STEM institutions are colorblind, this would be what we expect. But that's not, so we think it's this. But the fact of the matter is that this doesn't necessarily completely follow from that. You'd have to assume that a whole bunch of other things are perfectly identical. And very much so, they oversimplified a very complex phenomena themselves. Social interactions and effects of culture, where you grew up, individual choices for that matter, whole bunch of myriad things in here that could very much have an influence on the demographics in a STEM institution. I don't deny there's disparities. I don't deny that at all. I've observed the data. However, merely saying there is a disparity is not proof that it is from racism or so-called white supremacy culture. So They actually reduced a very complex problem to a single simple thing. It's this because this is the way, it's this because of this odd little thing. They committed their own either or thinking by their own definition here in this article. This also doesn't follow. Racism in STEM primarily occurs via discrete, isolated instances of discriminatory behaviors. In other words, racism is perpetuated by a few bad apples. Taking action would resolve isolated incidents of racism and result in a diverse, equitable STEM institution. So, if true, then we expect, but persistent racial disparities have not changed much over time. So, again, disparity fallacy involved here. That racial disparities are the result of systemic racism, because you've also committed either or thinking by your own statement in table 1. That's why I had to end up doing this article, because I noticed a bunch of these things and I wanted to explain them out quite well. Is they actually put their own logical contradictions in here multiple times over in terms of either or thinking, and reduced by their own admission, reduced by their own action here in writing, reduced a complex phenomenon to a simple thing, simplistic thing. It's incorrect, though. It is very incorrect. Oh, goodness. I don't want to belabor the point here because I think this video has gone long enough, but there is quite a number of things here. I just want to show the graphic again in larger form so you all can see it here, in that this is very emblematic of a lot of things that are in similar fashion. Here, oh goodness, I gotta make this a little smaller for you guys. Oh goodness, that's not good. Well, we might have to deal. For those who can't see off the screen here, it says self, interpersonal, community, institution, society, politics, culture, society, culture. Here, what do I need to learn? How can I constructively acknowledge and respond to discomfort? How can I give credit and hold the door open? Intentionality, reflexivity, reciprocity is what we got here at the top. And you notice it's about power. How will we listen? How are we acknowledging and empowering identities? I hate that phrase, identities, because frankly, you only have one identity. It's your internal self, and that's it. Thank you very much. Oh, goodness. And ensuring equitable interactions. What the heck do you mean by equitable interactions? Oh, goodness. How are we acknowledging what is needed and who decides? Who's what? Yeah. This is one of those strange graphics that literally is a bunch of gobbledygook as far as I'm concerned. But those are the two big things that I wanted to point out. That this has got actually some serious fundamental flaws with respect to the notions that they put in here. The only other thing I want to say about this particular thing here is because, again, they assume that it exists here. They assume that it exists. They frame these characteristics. So most, if not all, of does white supremacy culture exist in STEM? Most, if not all, of the white supremacy culture characteristics described by Jones and all are valued as essential for in our field. White supremacist norms are prevalent in college admission and hiring, network funding, what have you. Accordingly, institutional and systemic change is needed to mitigate white supremacy culture characteristics woven in the... Okay. Again, as I point out, they assign those characteristics and they frame them as being bad. But for the things that we do in STEM, perfectionism in particular is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing at all. Besides, I pretty much like the next bridge I drive over not to fall down while I'm driving on it. And you need perfectionism for that. You need perfectionism and precision for that in your numerics and calculations. You absolutely need it. Same thing for the next meteorologist developing the next climate model. Not the next climate model, I'm sorry. The next weather forecast model. I want that to be the damn best as I can, because who knows? It might just forecast the next tornado, be used to forecast during the next tornado outbreak. And so if it gets a number wrong in there, doesn't get the tornado outbreak placed right, somebody could end up getting a forecast wrong, and that could cost people lives. There is a reason perfectionism is not necessarily a bad thing in STEM. But nonetheless, these characteristics are both being framed as bad by assigning the label white supremacy culture, but they are also being framed as being part and parcel of white people and white culture. And again, that goes back to our lovely graphic here, which, reminder, Smithsonian had to pull it down because of what it did with assigning characteristics to people on the basis of race, and they've effectively done that in this article with this. Here. The other thing I want to point out, some argue that science is neutral, objective, and even colorblind. What are they talking about by science here? My guess is they're probably talking about the institutions. Not necessarily the process, because the process of science is, of course, about getting to the truth, in which case it's not a process with a moral compass. You get that moral compass from your worldview, your values, your philosophy, what have you. Doing science does not give you a moral compass. Though you can certainly you can certainly do well in science if your particular moral compass is grounded around finding the truth and not stupid power dynamics and what have you, as this article seems to be interested in. Because I've seen, a lot of the things about power in here more than a few times. Oh, goodness. But this is, the fact that we know people are biased is the reason we have some of the features that we do, particularly the principle of organized skepticism, whereby every single thing is reviewed and critiqued carefully in an organized manner with peer review and other things. Is it perfect? No. Heck no. We know full well it's not perfect. But to say that we do not try to push for perfection in these kinds of things, to push for making sure stuff is not done in a biased manner, aka checking things carefully under the norm of disinterestedness, which saying you're doing science for the sake of pursuing the truth and not for your own benefit and not for any personal vested interest and advocacy. Yeah. Science is not perfectly neutral, but I think we do a damn good job with the things that we have. There's a lot of things that need to be fixed. I do agree with that. There's a lot of things that might need to be fixed, particularly as it pertains to peer review. I could see that. But science is a method. It's not a person. So that one's kind of null and void. But I think science as a profession has done a half-decent job over the years, because there are many things to try and ensure that such things are not biased in research. Other things, on the other hand, that's different. We might be able to argue that. But no, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that particular statement that you've made. I think that's it. Actually, that's all I really wanted to say about this article. That's all that was really worth talking about in this article, because the rest of it is based on the premises that are faulty. Here, very faulty premises from the start, because it presumes that white supremacy culture exists and did not give me a really compelling evidence to that, because you're just saying these characteristics are white supremacy culture. Didn't really give me any convincing evidence. Sorry. That's it. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good jazz. And until next time, I'm Adrian, and I hope you stay curious, my friends.